There's a place at Russia's northernmost point called the Taimyr Peninsula. It's basically in the Arctic, and it's where Russia has been quietly building a secret new megaport. But what's really shocking is that this $110 billion project has stayed quiet for so long considering just how big it is. It's gonna house over 400,000 workers in the middle of literally nowhere, so they've had to build the infrastructure from scratch. We're talking highways, 2 new airports, 15 villages, multiple railways, and a brand new 500-mile-long oil pipeline. They've even installed the first Arctic fiber optic cable. You heard right, Russia's frozen wasteland probably has better internet than you. The port's gulf was dug out for larger ships to pass through, just in time for a new fleet of 40 ice-class vessels, including 8 nuclear-powered icebreakers. Why is Putin building a giant megaport in the Arctic? Because right now, there's a secret race between Russia, China, and the United States to conquer the Arctic. The polar ice caps are melting, which presents an opportunity like never before. For the first time in history, humanity will have ready access to the Arctic, which means faster shipping lanes, untouched fishing stocks, as well as trillions of dollars in oil, natural gas, and rare metals. The question is, who's gonna conquer the Arctic first? Right now, it looks like it's gonna be Putin. Stay dangerous, subscribe for more, and this is the battle for the Arctic. And if you're a creative freelancer like a digital marketer, photographer, designer, or even a writer, and you're looking to raise your prices, then you have to check out Bloom.io. Bloom is also free, so you're gonna want to stick around. Bloom.io basically took all the tools you typically have to duct tape together to run your business, like DocuSign, Money.com, Typeform, WordPress, Stripe, and put them all together into the sleekest, cleanest, all-in-one solution designed specifically for freelancers and small agencies. Website? You can build a beautiful one to showcase your work, capture leads directly on your website, and even allow people to buy your services, sign the contract, set up a retainer, book a time, all within Bloom. Once you close a client, that's where the real game changer comes in. Bloom's Client Portal, where you can invite them to their own customized client portal, they can see the deliverables you made, they can chat with you, and most importantly, they can see your beautiful invoice and pay for it right then and there with Cash App, Venmo, Zelle, PayPal, and more. This is a super easy way to raise your rates because of how professional it makes you look. Bloom also gives you different project management workflows for different services you offer, email automations, lead management, a super powerful built-in calendar, and so much more. So start making more money right now with Bloom's free tier with the link below, or use code JAKETREND for 30% off their premium features. Pause the video and go to bloom.io/JakeTrend with code JAKETREND with the link below. You're not gonna regret it. Thanks to Bloom for sponsoring this video. In 2017, a Russian oil tanker became the first ship to cross the Northern Sea route from China to Europe without needing an icebreaker. This cut the trip from 48 days to just 19 days. And since the Arctic is expected to have ice-free summers as early as 2035, this voyage caught the whole world's attention as a sign of things to come. It was a game changer. See, traditionally, you would have to go to the Panama and Suez canals to ship stuff around the world. But the Panama and Suez have a reputation of slowing commerce down. Like in 2021 when the Evergreen container ship got stuck in the Suez and blocked all shipping traffic for 6 days, which caused a loss of $6.9 billion in international trade for each day it was stuck. But the Arctic? If you were able to transport goods through the Arctic, it would change all of that and give whatever country that controls that route unparalleled wealth and power. That's why Russia plans to ship 100 million tons of oil through the Arctic each year by the time the new port is running at full capacity. So even though they sunk more than $100 billion into the project, it will be very worth it.
Общая инвестиция, сказать?
Больше даже 10 триллионов рублей.
В конечном итоге где-то по 2% ВВП.
Это приведет к росту на 2% ВВП страны ежегодно.
Now, a 2% increase in GDP doesn't sound very impressive, but when you look at the numbers and realize that a 2% increase in GDP would mean Russia will make at least $30 billion more each year than they were making before, you start to understand why Putin is pushing for this so much. And this is just the beginning. The Arctic is gonna make Russia insanely rich. And if the US doesn't catch up, it's gonna really shift the balance of power around the world. But faster shipping lanes aren't the only source of wealth the Arctic has to offer. There are untapped riches like nickel, platinum, and rare earth metals needed to build computers and other tech buried within the Arctic. It's also believed to contain almost a fourth of the world's undiscovered fossil fuel supply, which would be worth at least $35 trillion in today's money. And it's not just Russia that's vying for power in the Arctic. it's gonna take more than just one megaport to make the Northern Sea route into a functional shipping lane. Several smaller ports and stops will also have to be built along the way. So to do this, Russia is enlisting the help of China. China is building a bunch of docks and ports with Russia in the Arctic as part of Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative. And this is just the latest in China's efforts to gain power in the Arctic. Only a year after Russia's record-breaking ice-free trip to Europe, China announced their initiative for a Polar Silk Road, and that China was officially a near-Arctic state, which is a reference to countries like Iran being called near-nuclear states. This claim definitely didn't cause any controversy at all. China even argued that the world's nations should take a cooperative-friendly approach to sharing Arctic resources with one another, and that resources should be divided equally among the world's population, which would conveniently mean that China gets 25% of everything in the Arctic just by default. What a coincidence! Surprisingly, no one else seemed to support the idea. But that didn't stop China. They've been doing exploration missions and setting up research bases in the Arctic for decades. They even bought a Ukrainian-built icebreaker named the Shui Long or Snow Dragon. They've been using it to explore, conduct research, and do surveillance on their competitors. They got a second icebreaker called the Shui Long 2 in 2021, but that is far from where their Arctic dreams end. Another goal of China is to build a network of bases for both economic and military purposes, such as the 3 new airports they tried to build in Greenland, as well as an abandoned naval base they tried to buy there, because Arctic shipping lanes wouldn't just mean better economic trade for China, it would also mean that their military could get to the Atlantic Ocean and many other parts of the world they weren't able to before, just like they did this past August, when Chinese warships surprised the US Coast Guard by showing up 50 miles off the Alaskan coast without warning. But many of these attempts to expand in the Arctic have been shut down. And with Russia's northern border dominating so much of the Arctic territory, China knows that if they want to get their slice of the Arctic, they're gonna have to play nice with Russia, at least for the time being. Because the old if you can't beat them, join them strategy is much better for China than being left out of the Arctic entirely. Unfortunately for the United States, America is already a few years behind in this race for the Arctic. The US has had some issues keeping up with the competition in the Arctic, simply because the idea is not very popular in America. Remember when Trump was president and he tried to buy Greenland? Everyone thought it was an insane idea. The territory of Greenland is actually owned by Denmark, who wasn't too thrilled by the idea. Everyone thought he was joking, and when it turned out he was serious, they just thought he was crazy. But as it turns out, it wasn't a completely random idea. See, the US already has claims of their own in the Arctic territory, through the shipping lanes they share with Canada along the Northwest Passage, as well as the massive oil and gas reserves on the north slope of Alaska. But there's a problem. Not only are Russia and China building massive projects for shipping and extracting natural resources in the Arctic, and they're beefing up their military presence in the region, the US hasn't really been doing anything to develop or protect this territory. Russia has reopened at least 50 abandoned Soviet military bases on their northern border, as well as building big brand new ones. On top of that, Russia has 16 deep water ports and 13 air bases all protected by long-range surface-to-air missiles, while the US military has exactly nothing in the Arctic. Nothing at all. See, Russia knows a warming Arctic means their incredibly massive 15,000-mile-long northern border is no longer safe. They can't count on all the ice, snow, and dangerous weather to keep their enemies out anymore. And for the US, that also means that the north slope of Alaska is no longer safe either. After all, Russia's only about 55 miles from US territory, and that's a risk that can go both ways. So the US has a lot of work to do in order to up its game. Securing access to territory like Greenland would be a smart idea. Not only is it full of natural resources, but its territorial waters would be a big part of the shipping lanes the US would need in order to compete. The US also desperately needs a new icebreaker fleet. Just because the polar ice will be gone in the summer doesn't mean winter travel won't be an issue. Having icebreaker ships is a necessity. It's why Russia has a massive fleet of their own. They have 40 icebreakers in total, including nuclear-powered ones. It's also why China is trying to build its own fleets, and why other Arctic nations like Canada, Finland, Sweden, they all have about 6 or 7 of their own icebreakers as well. But for its massive military and navy, the US barely has 2, and I mean barely. Its heavy-class icebreaker called the Polar Star was built in 1976, so it's 47 years old and can barely run anymore without breaking down. But instead of being decommissioned after 30 years of service, the Coast Guard has had to keep it running, simply because we don't have anything else. The second icebreaker is only a medium class, and after an engine fire in 2020, it's been sitting unused awaiting repairs. So the US Arctic fleet is pretty sad. And then there's the problem of America not having an Arctic military base. This makes doing things like keeping an eye on passing Chinese warships a little bit difficult. Trump had a bunch of plans in the works to change this, like floating the idea of buying Greenland, ordering construction of a new fleet of icebreakers, as well as a series of military bases to be built in the US Arctic territory. Him and Congress even pushed the US military to build a port to rival the megaport the Russians were building. But due to one reason or another, one by one these projects were shut down. The US is being left out in the cold. Surprisingly, the Biden administration hasn't stopped paying attention to the Arctic. It didn't stop being an important issue, it just became one that couldn't be discussed openly. Mostly out of the fear of alienating people who had concerns about protecting the environments. So rather than get caught backpedaling or changing its mind, the White House quietly announced a new strategy for the Arctic in October of this year. The public documents outlining this strategy are super vague and don't mention any specific projects. But there have been quite a few things starting up again. Construction has continued on a brand new icebreaker. The government is looking to buy another privately owned icebreaker to add to its fleets. Granted, this is a far cry from the minimum of 6 the Coast Guard says it needs in order to function. It is a start. The Department of Defense also just announced they're establishing a research center in Anchorage, Alaska, and the US government has also issued a record-breaking number of oil drilling permits on public lands, including 1 million acres just off the Alaskan coast. Again, it's not much, but it is a start. Russia has put everything on the line to pull ahead in this race, and so far it's really paying off for them. At this point, even China, who doesn't have its own Arctic territory, is way ahead of America's efforts, making this a race the US cannot afford to sit out. The Arctic is melting because of climate change, but there's a lot more to climate change than meets the eye. Climate change is for sure happening, but for an issue that's supposedly about the survival of the species, there seems to be an awful lot of power games and profiteering involved. Take Al Gore for example. Al Gore is a genius. He used his position as vice president to push the global warming narrative. He got everyone all scared. He got the government all scared and willing to fund the fight against global warming. And then what did he do? He started a hedge fund. A hedge fund called Generation Investment Management. Wow, what a noble sounding cause. It's a hedge fund that invests in, what do you know, renewable technology. How did this hedge fund work out for him? Well, in 2017, he was worth an estimated $200 million. That's because over the past 10 years, the total ROI on renewable energy has been 367% higher than fossil fuels. Al Gore created the problem, and he offered the perfect solution on a silver platter: his hedge fund. And there are many other profiteers in this world of climate change just like Al Gore. Like how climate change seems to be a great excuse for rich countries to keep poor countries poor. However, we can't talk about any of this in a public video because this is one of the most dicey topics on YouTube. So we just released a private documentary on climate change narrated by me. A private documentary that I'm still legitimately scared might get taken down because although it does conform with all of YouTube's community guidelines, it's still extremely spicy and controversial. Seriously guys, this one is good. And you can watch it right now by clicking that join button below. By joining, you'll get access to this documentary and other ones every month that really are too controversial to be released publicly. The average college course costs over $1,100. And what do you learn? Nothing. You leave the class in debt, and you're still clueless about how the world really works. But with this, you get all this knowledge on how the world really works for just $5 a month. So hit that join button below and enjoy one of our most controversial documentaries yet. I promise you won't regret it. How serious is my promise? Well, there's a 1-month refund policy unlike most YouTube memberships. So if you join and you don't think it's worth it, email us within the first month of joining for the first time, and we will personally refund you for your first month. After your first month, there is no refund. Scroll down and click that join button now.